The gravity in the Moonglass Citadel was a polite suggestion, rather than a law of physics. It felt like walking underwater, without the resistance of floaty, dreamlike sensation that made Peter feel incredibly, undeniably heavy. Peter adjusted the cuffs of his dress uniform. It was a dark, synthetic fabric that absorbed the ambient light, standing in stark contrast to the shimmering, translucent materials worn by the locals. He was the security advisor for the Terran delegation, a title that meant he was a glorified babysitter for politicians who thought the universe was a marketplace waiting to be bought. But Peter was not counting credits. His eyes dark and still were counting exits. 1. The main archway crystalline and brittle-looking. 2. The ventilation shaft masked by a singing decorative panel. 3. The diplomatic docking bay 400 meters down. He walked with a deliberate magnetic rhythm. His boots were weighted, a necessity for a human who did not want to bounce like a balloon in the Citadel's 0.6 gravity. Every step he took sent a dull, thudding vibration through the floor, a sound that seemed offensive, in a place designed for silence and song. Juno Hart, the Terran engineer, walking beside him, nudged his elbow. She was the only person here who knew him from before, from the days when his uniform was not for show and the mud was real. "You are doing it again," Juno whispered, keeping a smile plastered on her face for the benefit of the tall, slender guards watching them. "Doing what?" Peter asked, his voice low. "Scanning the structural integrity of the ceiling. Thinking about how much explosive ordnance it would take to bring that chandelier down. You have that look, Peter, the one that says you are calculating blast radiuses." Peter allowed a small, practiced smile to touch his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "It would take 2 charges, one for the anchor point, one for the resonance damper. But I am just admiring the architecture, Juno." "Right," she drawled. "Just remember, we are here to shake hands, not break them. Try to look less like a loaded weapon and more like a charming veteran." "That is the cover, is it not?" "It is not a cover, if it is true," Peter replied. He was a veteran. Whether he was charming remained to be seen. They entered the grand concourse, a hallway so high and wide, it felt like standing inside a cathedral, made of frozen light. The walls were not merely walls. They were resonance chambers. The entire citadel was built on the principle of the wolf song pulse, a rhythmic energy field that sustained the city and the physiology of its inhabitants. Peter could feel it in his teeth, a low-level hum that sat right at the base of his skull. It was annoying, like a mosquito trapped in a room, but to the locals, it was life. And then he saw her. Daisy, the wolf heir. She was standing in the center of a group of courtiers, head and shoulders taller than any human, her limbs elongated and elegant. Her skin had the faint pearlescent sheen of someone who had never known the harsh radiation of an unfiltered sun. She wore a gown that seemed to be woven from fiber optics and silk shifting colors with her mood. She looked bored. It was a profound existential boredom that only the very powerful and the very young could possess. As the Terran delegation approached, the crowd of courtiers parted like water. Peter stayed a step behind the ambassador, playing his part, the silent shadow. Daisy turned her gaze toward them. Her eyes were wide, the irises, a shifting violet that seemed to vibrate. She looked over the ambassador, dismissed him entirely, and her gaze landed on Peter. It was not a look of interest. It was the look a child gives a new strange toy that she suspects might be broken. "So," Daisy said. Her voice was melodic, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "This is the heavy one." The ambassador cleared his throat. "Your Highness, this is Peter, our chief of security. He is here to ensure—" "He does not sing," Daisy interrupted. She stepped forward, her movement fluid, almost swimming through the low gravity. She stopped directly in front of Peter. She smelled of ozone and cold flowers. I can feel the silence around him. It is like standing next to a black hole. How do you live without the song human Peter met her gaze. He did not look up in awe, and he did not look down in deference. He looked straight at her. "We manage, your highness. We make our own noise," the courtiers gasped softly. One did not speak back to the wolf heir so casually. Daisy tilted her head. She was used to fear. She was used to adoration. She was not used to a dense block of carbon and water, standing in her space, displacing her air, and refusing to be impressed. "You are arrogant," she said, a small frown, marring her perfect features. "You come to my home heavy and dull, dragging your gravity with you like a chain. Do you know that I could stop your heart, just by thinking it? My people can resonate with the fluids in your body. I could boil you from the inside." It was a threat, but it sounded like a tease. She was testing the boundaries, poking the animal to see if it would bite. "I have been told my blood runs cold, ma'am," Peter said. "You might find it difficult to boil." Juno coughed into her hand to cover a laugh. Daisy's eyes narrowed. She was the wolf heir. She was the vessel of the pulse. She was not to be mocked by a creature whose bones were made of chalk and rock. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to flinch, to bow, to acknowledge her supremacy in this domain of glass and light. She moved faster than a human could track. It was a blur of motion, a sudden spike, in aggression fueled by humiliation and the intoxicating power of the low gravity. She raised her hand and swung it toward Peter's face. It was meant to be a slap, a sharp, stinging rebuke to put the soldier in his place. But Daisy did not understand the physics of a human being. She did not understand that Peter weighed nearly 200 pounds of dense muscle and reinforced bone. She did not understand that his boots were magnetically locked to the floor plating. She did not understand that in a collision between a hollow-boned, low-gravity avian structure and a solid terrestrial object, the terrestrial object does not yield. Peter saw the slap coming. He could have blocked it. He could have dodged. But that would have caused a diplomatic incident. If he dodged, she might overbalance and fall. If he blocked, he might bruise her wrist. So he made the split-second calculation to take the hit. He braced his neck muscles, locked his jaw, and stood absolute stillness. Crack. The sound was not the wet slap of flesh on flesh. It was the sickening dry pop of a green stick snapping. Silence slammed into the corridor. It was absolute and terrifying. Daisy froze. Her hand was still raised, but her wrist was bent, at an impossible angle. The impact had not moved Peter's head a single millimeter. He stood like a statue of iron. Then a secondary sound followed. A high-pitched ping. On the wall behind Peter, a hairline fracture appeared on one of the resonance panels. The sheer kinetic energy of the impact, rejected by Peter's density, had traveled back through Daisy's arm, through the air, and disturbed the delicate acoustic balance of the room. Daisy stared at her hand. She did not scream immediately. Her brain was trying to process the information. She had hit him, and she was the one who was broken. Peter slowly raised his hand not to strike, but to touch his own jaw, checking for damage. There was none. He looked at the girl, the powerful, terrifying alien princess, who was now staring at her own limb with horror. "Ma'am," Peter said, his voice flat, devoid of mockery, but cutting deep because of its calmness. That was ambitious. The color drained from Daisy's face. The pain finally caught up with the shock. She let out a gasp that was half sob, half hiss. "My hand," she whispered. "My hand." "Do not move it," Peter commanded, his tone shifting instantly from diplomat to field medic. He stepped forward and the courtiers flinched back. "You have a compound fracture. Your bones are—" He stopped himself from saying hollow and weak. "Your bones are not designed for percussive impact against high-density targets." "Get away from me!" Daisy shrieked, clutching her wrist to her chest. The humiliation was burning hotter than the pain. She was the wolf heir. She was supposed to be untouchable. And this thing had broken her just by existing. The doors to the medical wing burst open before anyone could call for help. The Citadel's internal sensors had registered the break. Dr. Saren, rushed in flanked by 2 medical drones. He was a tall, nervous-looking man with skin the color of polished slate. He took one look at Daisy's wrist, then one look at Peter's face, and his eyes widened to the size of saucers. "Stabilize Her Highness," Dr. Saren ordered the drones. He turned on Peter, brandishing a handheld scanner like a weapon. "What did you do? Did you use a kinetic weapon, a dampener field?" "I stood still," Peter said. "Impossible," Saren muttered, running the scanner over Peter's chest and head. The device let out a frantic trill of data. Saren looked at the readout and stopped. He tapped the screen, thinking it was broken. "Look at these readings," Saren whispered, forgetting his anger, in the face of scientific baffling. Bone density is 4 times the standard. Muscle fibers are wound so tight they register as synthetic weave. Core temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. You are burning. You are a furnace. "I am human," Peter said. "We run hot." Daisy was being lifted onto a floating stretcher by the drones. The pain dampeners were kicking in, but her eyes were locked on Peter. She heard the doctor. 4 times the density. A furnace. She had thought him a dull, lifeless rock. She realized now that a rock, when dropped from a height, could crush a skull. She had walked into an anvil thinking it was a pillow. "Get him out!" Daisy hissed, though her voice lacked its usual imperious fire. It was shaky. "Get him out of my sight!" "I advise you to listen to her," Dr. Saren said to Peter, though he looked like he wanted to dissect Peter right there in the hallway. "The air needs resonance therapy. Your density disrupts the local field. You are static noise to her healing." Peter nodded once. "I will be outside." He turned and walked away. He did not run. He did not apologize. He simply resumed his patrol, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. Thump, 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 the sound of inevitability. 2 hours later, Peter stood guard outside the regeneration suite. The corridor was dimmer here, the lights pulsing in a slow, rhythmic blue that was meant to mimic a heartbeat. Juno Hart leaned against the wall opposite him. She was holding a datapad, scrolling through the diplomatic fallout. "The ambassador is having a stroke," Juno said cheerfully. "He is trying to explain to the High Regent why his daughter tried to slap a security consultant and ended up needing orthopedic surgery. The official story is a training accident." "She has bad form," Peter said, staring at the closed door. "She led with her wrist, not her knuckles. And she expected me to move." "She is a princess, Peter. The world usually moves for her." Juno lowered the pad. "You could have leaned back. Just an inch." If I had leaned back," Peter said, "she would have lost her balance. In this gravity she would have tumbled and hit her head on the resonance glass. A fractured wrist is a lesson. A cracked skull is a war." Juno sighed. "You are always calculating, aren't you, even when you are being slapped? Especially then." Peter closed his eyes for a second. He was tired. The constant hum of the station was grating on his nerves. It felt like standing inside a giant tuning fork. And then the hum changed. It was subtle. Most humans wouldn't have noticed it. But Peter had spent 10 years in the trenches of Cindervale. He had learned to listen to the silence before the mortar fell. He had learned to hear the change in pitch when a shield generator was about to overload. The lights in the corridor flickered, not a power surge. It was a chromatic shift. The blue pulse turned a sickly bruised violet for a fraction of a second, then snapped back to blue. The vibration in the floor skipped a beat. Thump, thump, pause, thump, thump. Peter's eyes snapped open. His hand drifted instinctively to the concealed stun baton at his belt. Down the hall, a figure was watching the lights. It was an older male, a wolfkin with fur that had turned silver with age. He wore the robes of a keeper, the historians and engineers of the Citadel. It was Keeper Thane. He was staring at the light fixture with a look of profound, terrified recognition. He held a data scroll in his hands, gripping it so tightly that the edges were crumpling. Thane looked at Peter. For a second, the two men locked eyes. The keeper's expression was pleading, or perhaps warning. Then he turned and hurried away, vanishing into a service alcove. "Did you see that?" Peter asked. "See what?" Juno asked, looking up. "The light's flickering power grid probably just hiccuped. This place runs on ancient tech, Peter. It is bound to have glitches." "That was not a glitch," Peter said softly. That was a stutter." Before he could explain, the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a whisper. Chancellor Malrech stepped out. If Daisy was a glass sculpture, Malrech was a blade made of obsidian. He was tall, severe, and moved with a predatory grace that made the low gravity look like his natural element. He wore the high collar of the pureblood faction, and his hands were clasped behind his back. He walked straight toward Peter. He did not look at Juno. He did not look at the door where the injured heir lay. He looked only at Peter. "So," Malrech said. His voice was smooth like oil, pouring over gravel. "You are the immovable object." Peter stood at attention, but he did not salute. "Chancellor." Malrech stopped a meter away. He was taller than Peter, looming over him, but Peter felt dense and grounded. "I heard about the incident," Malrech said. "A tragic misunderstanding. Her Highness is spirited. She often forgets that not everything in the universe is as malleable as her courtiers." "I hope she recovers quickly," Peter said. "Oh, she will," Malrech smiled. It was a smile that did not touch his eyes. "Our medicine is advanced. But I am more interested in you, soldier. Dr. Saren sent me your bioscans. Unauthorized, of course, but I have my ways." Malrech leaned in closer. "Bone density, 400% of the norm. Neural pathways hardened against trauma. You are a biological tank." "I am just a man-chancellor." "No," Malrech corrected softly. "You are a discordant note, a disruption in the song. Do you know what we do with discordant notes in the Citadel?" "Tune them," Peter suggested. "We excise them," Malrech said. "Or we find a use for the noise." Malrech's eyes lingered on Peter's face. He wasn't looking at Peter as a diplomat, or even as a threat. He was looking at him the way a butcher looks at a particularly interesting cut of meat. He was measuring. Then Malrech's gaze flicked to the side toward the wall where the wolf song pulse hummed. He tapped his fingers against his thigh in a rhythmic pattern. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Peter froze internally. He knew that rhythm. The smell of ozone flooded his memory. The taste of copper and ash. The sky over Cindervale burning orange. It was the same signal. The jamming frequency that had blinded the Terran communications right before the slaughter at Cindervale. It hadn't been a random atmospheric disturbance. It had been a structured, rhythmic interference pattern. A pulse. And Malrech was tapping it against his leg. The rage that hit Peter was so sudden and so violent that his vision blurred at the edges. It took every ounce of his 10 years of discipline not to reach out and snap Malrech's neck. The man standing in front of him wasn't just a politician. He was connected to the betrayal. He was connected to the screaming radio channels and the silence that followed. Peter forced his breathing to remain steady. He forced his heart rate to stay under the limit that Saren's remote sensors might pick up. "I am just here to ensure the safety of the delegation," Peter said. His voice sounded mechanical to his own ears. "Of course," Malrech said, straightening up. "And you are doing a marvelous job. Breaking the heir's hand is certainly one way to ensure safety." The door to the medical suite hissed open. Dr. Saren stepped out. "She is awake. She is asking for him." He pointed a shaking finger at Peter. Malrech raised an eyebrow. "Is she? How fascinating." He turned to Peter. "Go on, soldier. The princess calls. But remember, this citadel is made of glass. If you push too hard, you won't just break a bone. You will bring the roof down on all of us." Malrech turned and walked away his steps, silent, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Peter watched him go. He was no longer counting exits. He was counting targets. "Peter," Juno whispered. "Juno, you look like you just saw a ghost." "Not a ghost," Peter muttered. "A debt." He turned and entered the medical suite. The room was filled with a thick, translucent orange gel. In the center, suspended in a zero-gravity field, lay Daisy. Her arm was encased in a glowing brace. She looked smaller now, stripped of her finery, floating in the suspension fluid. She opened her eyes as Peter entered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a mixture of pain and confusion. And something else. Fear. "Why are you so heavy?" she asked. Her voice was weak, transmitted through a speaker in the wall. Peter stood by the observation glass. "Gravity is just a habit, Your Highness. We carry ours with us." Daisy floated closer to the glass. She looked at his hands, the hands that hadn't moved, hadn't struck, but had still shattered her. "I tried to command you," she whispered. "My voice, the resonance it works on everyone. Why didn't you bow?" "I don't hear the music," Peter said. "Malrech was here," she said suddenly. "I saw his shadow under the door. What did he say to you? He told me not to break anything else." Daisy laughed a dry, brittle sound. "He is lying. He loves broken things. He wants the throne, Earthman, and he thinks you are a brute, a tool he can use to smash the locks." "And what do you think I am?" Daisy looked at him for a long time. "I think you are a wall," she said. "And for the first time in my life, I am afraid of crashing." "I am not here to hurt you," Peter said. "Go away," Daisy said, closing her eyes. She curled into a fetal position in the gel. "Just go away. Your silence is too loud. It hurts my head." Peter stood there for a moment longer. He looked at the fragile creature floating in the tank. She was the wolf heir, the key to the alliance, the future of this star system. But right now, she was just a scared girl with a broken wing. He turned and walked out of the suite, taking his post by the door. He stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed. He could still feel the phantom rhythm of Malrech's fingers tapping against his thigh. 1, 2, 3. The Citadel hummed around him, a song of power and light. But Peter was listening to a different tune. He was listening to the sound of justice approaching. It was a heavy sound, heavy as boots on glass. "I came for justice," Peter whispered to the empty corridor. "I will get it. I just have to make sure she doesn't become collateral damage." He looked at his own hand. It was steady. The game had begun. And for the first time since Cinder Vale, Peter knew exactly where the enemy was. He was right here, hiding behind a smile and a song. Peter closed his eyes and began to wait. He was good at waiting. It was the one thing the war had taught him that peace could never take away. The Moon Oath Gala was not designed for human comfort. It was designed to make light weep. The grand atrium of the Citadel had been polished until the floors looked like deep, stagnant water. Suspended above thousands of shards of resonance, crystal caught the light of the twin moons, refracting it into a dizzying spectrum of pale violets and cold silvers. The air was kept thin and chilled, perfect for the high metabolism physiology of the wolfkin, but biting enough to make a human's breath mist in front of his face. Daisy, the wolf heir, stood at the top of the crystalline staircase. She wore a gown of woven starlight, a fabric that seemed to have no mass floating around her limbs, like smoke caught in a draft. On her right hand, she wore a glove that reached her elbow, constructed of opaque white silk and reinforced with rigid structural weaves. Beneath that silk, her wrist was encased in a biogenic splint, the bones knitting together under the accelerated regeneration of the gel treatment. It throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that synced perfectly with her humiliation. "Smile," whispered High Regent Calder, standing a step behind her, Pain is private. The crown is public. Daisy forced the corners of her mouth upward. I am smiling, father. You are baring your teeth, Calder corrected gently. There is a difference. Try not to look like you want to eat the guests, especially the Terrans. Daisy's eyes flicked to the bottom of the stairs. The Terran delegation was a blot of matte black and charcoal gray against the shimmering iridescence of the court. And there, standing at the edge of the group like a gargoyle tasked with guarding a flower bed, was Peter. He was wearing formal evening dress, but on him it looked like camouflage. He stood with that maddening, heavy stillness, his hands clasped behind his back, scanning the room, not with wonder, but with the cold calculation of an architect looking for load-bearing walls to demolish. He broke me, Daisy whispered, the memory of the snap echoing in her hollow bones. You broke yourself against him, Calder said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that only she could hear. You mistook a stone for a pillow. Do not make that mistake tonight. Tonight, we secure the alliance. Go down there. Be the heir. Daisy took a breath of the thin air, straightened her spine, and descended. The gravity in the ballroom was manipulated to be even lower than the corridors, allowing the Wolfkin dancers to perform feats of aerial ballet, leaping 3 meters into the air and drifting down like feathers. The music was generated by the Wolfsong engine, deep below a hum, that had been tuned into a complex polyphonic orchestral piece. It vibrated in the marrow of every guest. Daisy moved through the crowd accepting bows and murmurs of adoration. She felt the eyes of the court on her. They were looking for weakness. They had heard rumors of the accident in the hallway. They wanted to know if the air was cracked. She would show them she was diamond. She steered her path directly toward the Terran sector. As she approached, the circle of diplomats widened. Juno Hart, holding a flute of bubbling blue nectar, nudged Peter. Target at 12 o'clock, Juno murmured. Shields up. Peter turned. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted imperceptibly, his center of gravity lowering. Mr. Peter, Daisy, said her voice carrying the bell-like clarity of someone trained in oratory arts. I did not think you would attend. I assumed the atmosphere here would be too thin for your constitution. Peter offered a shallow bow, technically correct, but devoid of submission. The doctor cleared me for duty, Your Highness. He said my constitution is surprisingly resilient. Daisy stepped closer, invading his personal space. In the low gravity, she floated slightly on her toes, bringing her eyes level with his. She smelled of ozone and crushed lilies. I suppose it is, she said, raising her gloved hand, the injured one, and resting it lightly on his shoulder. It was a calculated move, a gesture of forgiveness, of dominance. She was touching the weapon that hurt her, claiming ownership of it. You look uncomfortable, Peter. Are you afraid you might float away? I am weighted, ma'am, Peter said. He did not look at her hand. He looked at her eyes. I do not float. A pity, Daisy murmured, letting her fingers trail down the lapel of his jacket. The court was watching. She needed to reduce him. She needed to turn the immovable object into a prop for her performance. Floating is the closest one gets to freedom, but perhaps you prefer the ground. It is safer down there. Less falling. It is not the fall that worries me, Peter replied, his voice a low baritone that cut through the tinkling music. It is the landing. Daisy laughed, a sound like breaking ice. You are charming in a rustic way. Tell me, do all veterans of your wars have such grim outlooks? Or is it just you? Just me, Peter said. The others are usually happier. They survived. The dark humor hung in the air for a second. Daisy blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't playing the game of wit. He was playing the game of truth, and he was winning because he didn't care about the score. Juno Hart stepped in, sensing the air pressure dropping. What my colleague means, Your Highness, is that He is the life of the party back on Earth. You should see him at karaoke. He sings like a strangled cat, but he has spirit." Daisy glanced at Juno, then back at Peter. A smile tugged at her lips, a real one this time, amused by the absurdity of the stone-faced man singing. "I would pay a great deal of credits to see that," Daisy said. "Perhaps later. Peter, will you sing for your supper?" "I only sing under duress, ma'am," Peter said. "Or under fire. Then I shall have to decide which one to apply," Daisy said, her voice dropping to a whisper, intimate and threatening. Across the room, standing on the dais, high, Regent Calder watched the exchange. He held a goblet of wine, but did not drink. Beside him stood Chancellor Malrech. "She is playing with it," Malrech noted, his voice smooth. "She thinks it is a pet." Calder's eyes narrowed. He watched the way Peter stood, not stiff, but ready. He watched the way Peter's eyes tracked the perimeter of the room, even while Daisy was touching him. He watched the absolute lack of fear in the human's micro-expressions. "No," Calder said softly. "She thinks it is a game." Calder set his goblet down and descended from the dais. He moved with the predatory grace of an old wolf, the crowd parting instantly for him. He arrived at the Terran circle just as Daisy was about to make another sharp remark. "Father," Daisy said, stepping back and curtsying. "Daisy," Calder said. He nodded to the Terrans, then turned his gaze solely on his daughter. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. He leaned in close, bringing his lips to her ear, but his eyes remained locked on Peter. "You are enjoying yourself," Calder said softly. "I am managing the asset," Daisy whispered back confidently. "I am showing them that I am not afraid." Calder smiled. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a man who had burned cities to keep this citadel standing. "My dear," Calder said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade against her throat. "You are teasing a glacier. You are poking a sleeping explosive. Look at his hands. Look at his eyes." Daisy frowned, confused. "He is just a soldier, father. A heavy, slow soldier." "He is a survivor," Calder corrected. "And you picked the wrong guy to flirt with." The words struck Daisy with the force of a physical blow. You picked the wrong guy to flirt with. It wasn't a reprimand for her behavior. It was a warning about her survival. She looked back at Peter, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw what her father saw. The violence coiled beneath the tuxedo, the terrifying patience of a predator that knows it doesn't need to hunt to kill. Suddenly, the music changed. It wasn't a change in melody. It was a change in pressure. The wolf song pulse, which had been a background hum, spiked. It happened instantly. 1 second, the orchestra was playing a waltz. The next, a discordant screech ripped through the air, existing not just as sound, but as a physical vibration. High Regent Calder winced, his hand flying to his chest. Around the room, Wolfkin nobles gasped, clutching their heads. On the balcony overlooking the ballroom, Chancellor Malrech stood in the shadows, his hand resting on a portable interface tablet. He slid a virtual fader up by 2%. "Let us see who breaks," Malrech whispered. The screech intensified. It was a frequency specifically tuned to the resonance of hollow bones. To the humans, Peter, Juno, and the delegation, it sounded like a bad microphone feedback, annoying and loud. To the Wolfkin, it was agony. Daisy screamed. It felt as if someone had grabbed her skeleton and shaken it. Her injured wrist flared with white, hot pain as the fracture sight vibrated against the splint. The crystal chandeliers above began to sing a high-pitched, deadly ringing. "Father!" Daisy gasped, reaching out. Calder was on his knees, his face gray. The pulse was hitting the older generation harder. Their bones were more brittle, more attuned to the city's song. Crack. A massive crystal sculpture in the center of the room shattered, raining razor-sharp shards onto the dancers. Panic erupted. The low gravity turned the chaos into a nightmare. People weren't just falling. They were drifting, colliding, spinning out of control while screaming in pain. "Peter!" Juno yelled over the noise. "What is happening?" "Sonic attack," Peter barked. "Resonance frequency. It is hitting them, not us." He looked at Daisy. She was crumbling, her knees buckling as the vibration in her bones threatened to shatter her from the inside out. Above her, a 10-meter span of the resonance glass ceiling groaned. A spiderweb fracture raced across it, directly over the heir's head. Peter didn't think. He didn't calculate. He moved. He launched himself forward, his magnetic boots disengaging to allow him to sprint. He hit the slick floor, sliding like a battering ram. Daisy was falling. She looked up, her vision blurring, and saw the ceiling coming down, a curtain of death made of jagged glass. Then something slammed into her. It was heavy. It was warm. It was solid. Peter tackled her, wrapping his arms around her head and pulling her into a tight ball against his chest. He rolled, using his own dense, heavy body as a shield. The ceiling collapsed. Thousands of pounds of resonance glass crashed down. Shards the size of daggers rained onto the floor. They struck Peter's back, shredding his tuxedo jacket, slicing into the skin, bouncing off the dense muscle. Daisy lay curled beneath him, squeezed into the small space between his body and the floor. She could hear the glass impacting him, thud, slice, crunch. She expected him to scream. She expected him to be crushed. But he didn't move. He held her head against his chest with a hand that was as steady as steel. She could hear his heart. It wasn't racing. It was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was the only sound in the world that wasn't screaming. "Stay down," Peter growled into her ear. The dust began to settle. The screeching noise of the pulse cut off as abruptly as it had started, leaving only the sound of moaning and the tinkling of settling glass. "He is immune," a voice shouted from the balcony. It was Malrech's voice, amplified by the emergency speakers. "The humans, they are immune to the surge. They did this." The accusation hung in the air, toxic and immediate. Security drones, confused and operating on automated protocols, began to swarm the ballroom. Their sensors locked onto the only heat signatures that weren't writhing on the floor, the Terrans. "We need to move," Peter said. He pushed himself up, shaking glass from his shoulders like water. Blood soaked the back of his shirt, dark and wet, but he ignored it. He hauled Daisy to her feet. "My father," Daisy gasped, looking toward where Calder had fallen. "Juno has the regent," Peter said, pointing. Juno and the Terran security detail had formed a perimeter around the fallen king. "We are the target. Malrech just painted a bullseye on us. We need to get off the main floor." He didn't wait for her permission. He grabbed her uninjured hand and pulled. They ran. They sprinted through the service corridors, away from the screaming ballroom. The Citadel systems were going haywire. Lights flashed red. Gravity stabilizers flickered, making the floor lurch beneath them. One moment, heavy, the next, weightless. "Where are we going?" Daisy cried, struggling to keep up. Her bones still ached, a deep phantom throbbing. "The lower maintenance levels," Peter said. "The pulse knocked out the primary heating grid. The station is going to freeze in about 10 minutes. We need a sealed environment." They skidded around a corner, and Peter slammed his hand against the panel of an emergency atmospheric shelter. The door hissed open. He shoved Daisy inside and followed, punching the lock command, just as a squad of pureblood guards rounded the corner. The door sealed with a heavy clunk. Silence. The room was a small, utilitarian cube, meant for hull repair crews. It was unlit, except for the emergency phosphorescent strips on the floor. And it was cold. Bitterly, instantly cold. The wolf song pulse failure had sucked the thermal energy out of the environmental systems. Daisy slid down the wall, her legs giving out. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the shock and the cold. "It is freezing," she stammered, her teeth beginning to chatter. Wolfkin physiology was optimized for heat. They had no subcutaneous fat. Cold was not just uncomfortable for them, it was lethal. Peter checked the door controls. Locked, jammed from the outside. "We are safe, but we are stuck." He turned to look at her. In the dim green light, he saw her shaking. Her lips were turning blue. "My suit," Daisy whispered. "It is just light weave, no insulation." Peter stripped off his tattered jacket. It was ruined, sliced to ribbons by the glass, soaked in his blood. He dropped it in the corner. Underneath, he wore a white dress shirt, now stained crimson at the shoulders. "Come here," Peter said. Daisy looked at him warily. "What?" "You are going into hypothermia," Peter said, his voice practical. "I have a core body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. You are running cold. Physics says we need to equalize." He sat down on the floor, legs extended, and opened his arms. Daisy hesitated. She was the wolf heir. He was a human, a suspect, a brute who had broken her wrist. But the cold was biting into her marrow, a sharp physical pain that terrified her, more than he did. She crawled over to him. Peter pulled her into his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest so that her spine was pressed against his front. He crossed his arms over her stomach, creating a cocoon of flesh and muscle. The heat coming off him was shocking. He felt like a furnace. Every inch of him radiated a steady, intense warmth that soaked instantly into her freezing skin. Daisy gasped, burying her face in her hands. "You are burning." "I told you," Peter murmured, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. "We run hot." For a long time they just sat there. The only sound was their breathing. Daisy felt the slow, powerful thud of his heart against her back. It was steady, unafraid. "Why?" Daisy asked after a while, her voice small. "Why what?" "Why did you cover me? The glass, it cut you. I can smell the blood." "It is just surface damage," Peter said dismissively. "Skin heals." "But why?" she insisted. "I treated you like a tool. I tried to humiliate you. I broke myself trying to hurt you. Why did you save me?" Peter was silent for a moment. She could feel his chest expand as he took a deep breath. "Because the glass doesn't care who you are," Peter said. "And because Malrech wanted you dead. I generally dislike giving bad men what they want." Daisy shifted slightly, trying to get closer to the warmth. "My father said something to me. Before the music changed. He said I picked the wrong guy to flirt with." Peter let out a short, dry chuckle. "He is a smart man." "He meant you are dangerous," Daisy said. "Are you dangerous, Peter?" "To my enemies, yes." "Am I your enemy?" Peter tightened his arms around her slightly, just enough to stop a fresh wave of shivers. "Not tonight, ma'am. Tonight you are just cold." Daisy closed her eyes. She had grown up in a court of vipers where every touch was a transaction, every embrace a maneuver for position. Men wanted her for the crown, or for the bloodline, or for the beauty. They wanted to own the wolf heir. This man didn't want to own her. He was literally bleeding to keep her warm, and he asked for nothing. He didn't want her gratitude. He didn't want her secrets. He just wanted her to not die. It was the most confusing thing she had ever felt. "If you tell anyone I am a heater," Peter muttered, his voice rumbling in his chest, "I will deny everything. It ruins my reputation as a cold-hearted mercenary." Daisy let out a weak laugh. "Your secret is safe with me, but thank you." "Save the thanks. We are not out yet." Peter shifted one arm, reaching out to tap the interface of the emergency console. On the wall next to them, the screen flickered to life, showing a grainy feed of the Citadel's security grid. "What are you looking for?" Daisy asked. "Malrech," Peter said. He blamed us too fast. That speech was rehearsed. Peter scrolled through the logs. The system was locked down, but the emergency buffer still held the last few commands sent to the environmental grid, the commands that had spiked the pulse and killed the heat. There it was. A command line code. Simple, brutal. But it wasn't the code that made Peter's blood turn to ice. It was the digital signature attached to the packet. It was a stylized icon of a three-headed serpent consuming its own tail. Peter stopped breathing. He stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated hate. What is it?" Daisy asked, sensing the tension in his muscles. "Peter, you feel harder." "That symbol," Peter whispered. "The serpent." "I have seen it," Daisy said. "It is an old cipher Malrech uses for his private encryptions." "Why?" Peter didn't answer immediately. His mind flashed back 10 years, to a muddy trench in Cindervale, to a data pad he had pulled off the body of his commanding officer, the officer who had sold them out. The screen of that data pad had flashed that exact same symbol, just before the artillery rain began. It wasn't just a political coup. Malrech wasn't just a local warlord. He was the broker. He was the one who had taken the credits to slaughter Peter's unit. The heat radiating from Peter changed. It wasn't just survival warmth anymore. It was the heat of a kiln firing a weapon. "Peter," Daisy whispered, twisting her head to look at him. His face was in shadow, but his eyes reflected the green light of the screen. They looked like the eyes of a wolf before the pounce. "You asked if I was dangerous," Peter said softly. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Yes," Daisy breathed. "I lied," Peter said. "I am not dangerous. I am a catastrophe. And your chancellor just pulled the pin." He looked at the screen, memorizing the code. The debt was no longer abstract. It had a name. It had a face. And it was currently sitting on the balcony drinking wine while the Citadel froze. "We are getting out of here," Peter said. "And then I am going to have a conversation with Malrech." "A conversation?" Daisy asked. "The kind that ends with a lot of empty seats," Peter replied. He looked down at the girl in his arms. The wolf heir. The key to the kingdom. Malrech wanted to break her to control the engine. Peter realized with a sudden clarity that protecting her wasn't just about saving a girl. It was about denying Malrech his prize. It was the perfect revenge. "Can you run?" Peter asked. Daisy gritted her teeth, drawing on the warmth he had given her. "For you, no. For my crown, yes." "Good," Peter said. "Then let's go steal it back." The servant tunnels of the Moonglass Citadel did not sing. They groaned. Unlike the upper levels where the walls were composed of polished resonance crystal that hummed with the wolf-song pulse, the service sector was built from dull industrial polymers and recycled starship plating. It was the skeleton beneath the skin, the ugly functional reality that supported the ethereal beauty above. Daisy, the wolf. Air moved through the narrow corridor with a hesitation that had nothing to do with the low gravity. She was accustomed to soaring arches and light-flooded atriums. Here, the ceiling was low enough to brush her hair, and the air smelled of stale ozone and lubricant. "You are walking too loudly," Peter said. His voice was a low rumble from behind her. Daisy stopped and turned. In the gloom of the maintenance lights, Peter looked even larger than usual. His broad shoulders barely cleared the width of the tunnel. He was wearing a gray mechanic's jumpsuit they had stolen from a laundry chute. It was 3 sizes too small, straining across his chest and biceps, making him look like a boulder stuffed into a sock. "I am gliding," Daisy whispered, offended. "We are the Wolfkin. We do not stomp." "You are clicking," Peter corrected. "Your splint," he pointed to her injured wrist, still encased in the glowing biogenic brace. Every time she moved her arm, The brace emitted a faint high-frequency click as it adjusted the microgravity field around her bone. "I cannot help it," Daisy hissed. "It is medical equipment." "Wrap it," Peter said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a strip of cloth, a torn piece of a velvet curtain, from the room they had just vacated. He knelt, not out of reverence, but to bring himself to the level of her hand. He wrapped the velvet around the brace with surprising gentleness. His hands, rough and scarred, moved with the precision of someone who had field-dressed more wounds than he cared to count. Daisy watched him, fascinated by the contrast. He was a weapon that knew how to be a bandage. "Better?" Peter asked, standing up. "It is softer," Daisy admitted. "Thank you." "We are close," a voice said from the shadows ahead. Juno Hart stepped into the circle of light. The Terran engineer was holding a data pad that glowed with a complex schematic of the Citadel's nervous system. She looked at Peter, then at the wrapped wrist, and raised an eyebrow. "This is romantic," Juno deadpanned. "Crawling through sewer pipes to look at a generator. Peter, you really know how to show a girl a good time." "Focus, Juno," Peter said, ignoring the jab. "Is the perimeter clear?" "The sensors down here are ancient," Juno said, tapping the screen. "I looped the feed 5 minutes ago. As far as security knows, this hallway has been empty since the last dynasty. But we have to hurry. The energy output from the core is spiking again." They moved forward deeper into the belly of the city. The humming sound, the wolf-song pulse, became louder here. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical pressure vibrating in their teeth and fingertips. For Daisy, it was agonizing. Her hollow bones, designed to resonate with the song, were aching. It felt as if her skeleton was trying to vibrate apart. She gritted her teeth, leaning heavily against the wall. Peter was there instantly, his hand under her elbow to support her. "Can you make it?" "I must," Daisy said, breathless. "Malrech controls the song. If I do not understand how he is doing it, I cannot take the baton from his hand." They reached the heavy blast door, marked with the sigil of the Royal Engineers. It was locked, naturally, but standing beside it was a figure shrouded in gray robes. Keeper Thane looked terrified. The elderly wolfkin was wringing his hands, his silver fur bristling with anxiety. Beside him stood Dr. Saren, who looked less afraid and more professionally curious, like a scientist watching a volcano erupt from a safe distance. "Your Highness," Thane whispered, bowing low, "you should not be here. If the Chancellor finds out—" "If the Chancellor finds out, I will be dead anyway," Daisy said, straightening her spine. "Open the door, Keeper." Thane hesitated, then placed his palm against the bioscanner. The heavy metal groaned and slid aside. The chamber beyond was vast. It was a spherical room suspended over a seemingly bottomless shaft. In the center of the room hung the Wolfsong engine. It was a terrifyingly beautiful machine. A massive crystalline heart pulsing with a rhythmic white light. Thousands of fiber-optic veins ran from it into the walls, carrying the pulse to every corner of the Citadel. It beat like a living thing, thump-hiss, thump-hiss. "By the moons," Juno whispered. "That is not just a generator. That is a broadcast tower." "It is the history of our people," Keeper Thane said, his voice trembling. "The engine sings the song that keeps our biology stable in this gravity." But the song has changed. Thane led them to a console on the walkway overlooking the engine. He pulled up a holographic display showing a waveform. It was jagged, erratic, spiked with red peaks. "The legend says the pulse sings wrong before a king falls," Thane said. "But this is not a prophecy. It is sabotage." Dr. Saren stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. "I have been analyzing the data from the gala. The frequency that shattered the glass and your wrist, Your Highness, was not a malfunction. It was an injection." "An injection?" Peter asked. He was standing at the edge of the railing, staring down at the engine, with a look of intense, cold recognition. Someone introduced a secondary signal, Dr. Saren explained. A dissonance frequency. It is designed to target calcium carbonate structures with low density. Essentially, ideally designed to shatter Wolfkin bones, Peter finished, while leaving humans and heavy worlders untouched. Precisely, Saren said, looking at Peter with that unnerving fascination. Which brings me to you, Peter. I ran your scans again. Your bone density is not just high, it acts as a dampener. You absorb the resonance. You are a biological dead zone for the pulse. To a Wolfkin, you are a ghost. Daisy looked at Peter. Is that why you didn't feel it when the glass broke? Peter didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the engine, his eyes lost in the blinding white rhythm of the machine. I felt it, Peter said softly. The tone of his voice made everyone stop. It wasn't the voice of a soldier. It was the voice of a witness. At Cindervale, Peter said, turning to face them. We thought we were fighting a standard insurrection. We were dug into the mud, waiting for air support. Then the radio static started. It wasn't white noise, it was a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Daisy stepped closer to him. The same rhythm Malrech tapped. My squad, Peter continued, his face devoid of emotion, like he was reading a casualty list. 7 men. Good men. They didn't die from bullets. They didn't die from bombs. They just stopped. The signal hit a frequency that resonated with the neural implants Terran Command had installed in us. It cooked their brains inside their skulls. I survived because my implant had malfunctioned 2 days prior. I watched them shake apart while I felt nothing. The silence in the room was heavier than the gravity. It was not Terran tech, Peter said, looking at the Wolfsong engine. And it wasn't Wolfkin tech. It was this tech. Someone sold a piece of this engine to the enemy at Cindervale. They used my unit as a field test. Daisy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She looked at Peter. This mountain of a man who carried a silence so deep it frightened her. She had thought he was cold because he lacked feeling. Now she realized he was cold because he was frozen around a horror he could not thaw. Malrech, Daisy whispered. He didn't just find the amplifier. He sold the prototype. And now he has brought the finished product home, Peter said. Juno Hart cleared her throat, breaking the tension. Okay, so we have established that the Chancellor is a war criminal who likes to microwave people's brains. Great. Can we focus on the giant murder crystal I think I found what he installed? Juno pointed to a cluster of black nodes attached to the base of the crystal heart. They looked like leeches on a pristine body. That is a frequency amplifier, Juno said. It is overriding the safety protocols. If he cranks that up to 100%, he won't just break bones. He will liquefy the entire population of the Citadel. The only people left standing will be the humans. And then he blames us for the genocide, Peter said. He claims the Terrans attacked. He rallies the survivors, if there are any, and starts a war with Earth. He gets the throne, and he gets his revenge on the Alliance. We have to shut it down, Daisy said, reaching for the console. Don't, Dr. Saren shouted. Daisy froze. If you touch the primary interface now, while the amplifier is active, the feedback will kill you, Saren warned. Your nervous system is a conductor, Your Highness. You are connected to the engine by blood and genetics. It will fry you instantly. Then how do we stop it? Daisy demanded. We need to bypass the biolock, Juno said. But the system is designed to reject anything that doesn't have the Wolfkin resonance signature. Daisy looked at Peter. An idea formed in her mind, a desperate, dangerous idea. You said he is a void, Daisy said to Saren. A dead zone. Yes, Saren nodded. If I link to him, Daisy said slowly, and channel the feedback through his density, could he ground the charge like a lightning rod? Saren blinked. Theoretically, yes. But the mental strain. Your Highness, you would have to enter his mind. You would have to resonate with a human. It has never been done. It might be like trying to pour the ocean into a cup. Or a cup into a stone, Peter said. He stepped forward. Do it. Peter, Juno warned. This is not a karaoke machine. This is psychic surgery. Do it, Peter repeated, his eyes locked on Daisy. I trust her. Daisy took a deep breath. She stepped up to Peter. In the low gravity, she floated slightly, her face level with his. She placed her uninjured hand on his chest directly over his heart. She closed her eyes and pushed. She tried to send her consciousness into him, to find the rhythm of his soul, the song of his life. Usually, when she did this with her people, she heard music, violins, flutes, drums. With Peter, she hit a wall of silence. It was dark. It was heavy. It was a vast, featureless plain of gray steel. There was no music. There was only the wind blowing over a graveyard. Daisy gasped, her eyes snapping open. She pulled her hand back as if burned. I can't, she stammered. There is nothing there. It is just empty. She looked at him with frustration. Why are you so empty? Where is your song? Peter shrugged, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Maybe I am just boring, ma'am. You are not boring, Daisy said, her voice shaking. You are walled off. You are hiding inside a fortress and you threw away the key. It keeps the noise out, Peter said. We cannot do the link. It is too risky for you. Before they could argue, Juno's datapad screeched. We have movement, Juno hissed. Security grid just went active. Malrech knows we are here. Or at least he knows someone is poking his new toy. We need to leave, Keeper Thane said, panic rising in his voice. If they find the heir here. Go, Peter ordered. Juno, take the doctor and the keeper back through the service tunnels. I will take Her Highness up through the glass garden. It is a public area. If we are seen, we can claim we were just walking. Walking in a maintenance suit? Juno raised an eyebrow. Fashion statement, Peter said. He grabbed Daisy's hand. Run! The glass garden was a marvel of bioengineering. It was a biodome located on one of the outer spires, filled with crystalline plants that chimed when the wind blew. It was usually a place of peace. Tonight, it was a trap. Peter and Daisy burst out of the service hatch and into the garden. The artificial moonlight filtered through the translucent leaves, casting long, sharp shadows. We made it, Daisy breathed, leaning against a tree made of spun sugar glass. The guards are not here yet. Wait, Peter said. He stopped, his head cocked to the side. The chimes of the crystal trees had stopped. The silence was absolute. Get down, Peter roared. He tackled Daisy, driving her into the mossy ground, just as the wolf song pulse screamed. This wasn't a warning spike. This was a hammer blow. The air shimmered. The crystal trees shattered. Thousands of shards of glass exploded outward, turning the garden into a cloud of shrapnel. The guards, stationed at the perimeter, 4 Wolfkin soldiers, didn't even have time to draw their weapons. They collapsed, clutching their skulls, blood pouring from their ears as the frequency scrambled their equilibrium. Daisy screamed, curling into a ball. The sound was inside her head, a drill boring into her brain. Peter covered her, taking the brunt of the falling glass again. But this time he didn't stay down. We have to break the resonance, Peter yelled over the screaming noise. The dome acts as an echo chamber. He looked up. The dome of the garden was made of a single continuous sheet of resonance glass. It was vibrating, amplifying the pulse, turning the garden into a sonic kill jar. If he didn't break it, Daisy's brain would liquefy in 30 seconds. Peter stood up. He grabbed a heavy stone bench, something meant for decoration, weighing at least 300 pounds in standard gravity. In the low gravity, it was manageable but still massive. He roared, a sound of pure human exertion, and hurled the bench at the side of the dome. Crack! The impact was thunderous. The bench smashed through the vibrating glass. The pressurized atmosphere of the garden vented outward into the void of space, sucking the shards, and the sound out with it. The emergency force field snapped into place, instantly sealing the breach with a shimmering blue energy wall. But the glass was gone. The resonance was broken. The screaming stopped. Daisy lay on the moss gasping for air, her nose bleeding. She looked up at Peter. He was standing amidst the ruin of the garden. He was bleeding from a dozen new cuts. He held a jagged piece of crystal, in his hand a makeshift weapon. And pointing at him were 3 security drones. They hovered silently, their red recording lights blinking. "Citizen Peter," a mechanical voice intoned, "you are under arrest for the destruction of royal property and the assault on Her Highness's guard." Peter looked around. The 4 guards were unconscious, groaning on the ground. To the camera, it looked like Peter had knocked them out. It looked like he had smashed the garden in a rage. "It wasn't him!" Daisy cried, trying to stand up. She stumbled dizzy from the pulse. "It was the sound. The pulse attacked us." "Medical scans of the guards indicate blunt force trauma consistent with heavy worlder aggression," the drone stated. It was a lie. A programmed lie. Malrech had updated the software. Footsteps echoed on the path. A squad of elite shock troopers arrived, weapons raised. But they didn't aim at Peter. They aimed at Daisy. "Ah! Step away from the human, Your Highness," the lead officer shouted. "He is dangerous. He has been compromised." Daisy realized the narrative Malrech was spinning. Peter wasn't just a clumsy brute anymore. He was a berserker, an immune monster who destroyed their sacred places and hurt their people. "No!" Daisy shouted. She moved to stand between Peter and the guns. "I order you to stand down." Peter put a hand on her shoulder. His touch was heavy grounding. "Daisy," he said softly. It was the first time he had used her name without a title. She turned to look at him. His face was calm, resigned. "If you fight them," Peter said, "they will say you are being mind-controlled. They will say the human monster has bewitched the heir. You will lose the court. You will lose the throne." "I don't care about the throne," Daisy sobbed. "I won't let them take you." "You have to care," Peter said, "because if you don't take the throne, Malrech keeps the engine. And if he keeps the engine, everyone dies. Including Juno, including the doctor." He looked at the drones, then back at her. "Let me be the villain," Peter whispered. "It is what I am good at." He stepped away from her. He raised his hands in the air. "I surrender," Peter shouted, his voice booming. "I acted alone. The heir is innocent." "Peter, no!" Daisy screamed, reaching for him. The shock troopers fired, not bullets but containment nets. Heavy-weighted cables wrapped around Peter, pinning his arms, binding his legs. They hit him with stun batons 1, 2, 3 times. He didn't fall. He just grunted, absorbing the electricity that would have stopped a heart. They dragged him down to his knees. Daisy lunged forward, but 2 officers held her back. "Father!" she screamed. "Father, stop them!" High Regent Calder appeared at the entrance of the garden. He looked old, tired. He leaned on a cane, watching the scene with sad, knowing eyes. "Father, tell them," Daisy pleaded. "Tell them Peter saved me." Calder looked at his daughter. He looked at the shattered dome. He looked at Peter, bound and kneeling, bleeding onto the moss. "Take him to the isolation ward," Calder ordered the guards. "Father," Daisy gasped, betrayed. Calder walked over to her. He waited until the guards had dragged Peter away, disappearing into the shadows. "You fool," Calder hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I don't see Malrech's hand?" "Then why did you let them take him?" Daisy demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Because if I intervened," Calder said, gripping her shoulders, Malrech would have triggered the engine again. Right here. And this time he wouldn't have stopped until your skull cracked. We could have fought. With what? Calder snapped. We are glass, Daisy. We are glass, living in a house of sound. You cannot fight an earthquake by screaming at it. He shook her gently. If you pull too hard, you will snap the throne in half. You have to wait. You have to be patient. I am tired of waiting, Daisy said, her voice turning cold. She wiped the blood from her nose. And I am tired of being glass. Calder looked at her, and for a moment he looked afraid of his own daughter. She didn't look like a princess anymore. She looked like a queen who had just realized that crowns were heavy things. The isolation ward was silent. It was a lead-lined box deep in the bedrock of the Citadel designed to hold volatile chemical spills. Now it held Peter. He sat on the floor, his back against the cold metal wall. The containment nets were gone, but the door was sealed with a magnetic lock that could hold a starship in dock. He closed his eyes. He could feel the bruises forming. He could feel the cuts stinging. But mostly, he felt the absence of the girl. For 10 years, Peter had lived with a single goal: find the man who sold Cindervale. Find Malrech. Put a bullet in him. It was a simple, clean equation. But as he sat there in the dark, he realized the equation had changed. He pictured Daisy, not the imperious heir on the throne, but the girl in the maintenance tunnel trying to wrap a bandage around a glowing brace. The girl who had tried to jump into his mind, even though it terrified her. The girl who had stood in front of the guns for him. Revenge was a cold comfort. It was a fuel that burned dirty. But this feeling of needing to keep her safe, this was different. This was heavy. It was a weight he wanted to carry. Peter opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. Somewhere miles above him, Malrech was probably celebrating. He was probably drinking wine and planning the next verse of his genocide. You made a mistake, Chancellor, Peter whispered to the empty room. Malrech thought he had trapped a soldier. He thought he had caged a brute. He didn't realize that he had just given Peter the one thing he had been missing since Cindervale. Something to lose. Peter stood up. He walked to the door and placed his hand against the cold metal. He didn't pound on it. He didn't shout. He just started to count. 1, 2, 3. He was going to get out of here. He was going to break this citadel down to its foundations if he had to. Because Daisy had stepped into the zone of things Peter was not allowed to lose. And God help anyone who touched what belonged to the wolf heir. The coup did not begin with a shout. It began with a hum. It was a low, vibrating note that started deep within the bedrock of the moon-glass citadel, rising up through the crystalline spires, like sap rising in a poison tree. In her royal chambers, Daisy stood by the window, her hand pressed against the resonance glass. The vibration was so strong, it numbed her fingertips. She was not a prisoner, technically. The 4 guards stationed outside her door had bowed politely and informed her that for her own safety, she was to remain inside while the security assessment was conducted. But Daisy knew the truth. A lock did not need a key if it was made of polite words and men with guns. Outside, the city was screaming. The wolf song pulse had shifted. It was no longer the rhythmic heartbeat that sustained her people. It was a weaponized shriek. Daisy watched in horror as the lights of the lower districts flickered and died. She saw a transport skiff lose its navigational lock and drift aimlessly into a tower, bouncing off with a silent crash. The door to her chamber hissed, but it did not open. The locking mechanism had been overridden from the outside. "Open this door!" Daisy commanded, her voice amplified by her own panic. "I am the heir, open it!" There was no answer. The guards were likely wearing dampeners, or perhaps they were too busy listening to the new song Malrech was playing. Daisy backed away from the door. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked like a porcelain doll waiting to be smashed. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "Not glass. Not today." She grabbed a heavy silver candelabra from the table. It was weighted for stability, heavy enough to hurt. She moved to the side of the door and waited. If they came in, she would not be the fragile princess they expected. She would be the shard that cut. 5 levels down in the isolation ward, the air tasted of copper and ozone. Peter sat in the center of the cell. The room was designed to contain biological hazards, but right now it was acting as a resonance chamber. The walls were vibrating. Malrech had turned the power up. For a wolfkin, this frequency would be agony. It would vibrate their hollow bones until they fractured. For Peter, it was different. His bones were solid, dense calcium and collagen. They did not vibrate, instead they resisted. The result was heat. Peter felt like he was being cooked inside a microwave. His skin prickled with 1,000 invisible needles. His teeth ached. The metal fillings in his molars felt like they were sparking. He looked at the containment field generator in the corner of the ceiling. It was a small black node pulsing with a sickly, violet light. It was the source of the dampening field that kept the door locked. He stood up. The movement was sluggish. His muscles felt heavy, as if the gravity had been dialed up to 3 times the standard. "Pain is information," Peter muttered through gritted teeth. It was an old drill sergeant's mantra. It tells you you are still alive. He walked toward the corner. The field intensified. The air around the generator was distorted, rippling like heat haze. When he reached out his hand, a spark of blue energy jumped from the node to his fingertips. It burned. It felt like grabbing a live wire. Peter grunted a low animal sound in his throat. The smell of singed hair filled his nose. He did not pull back. He pushed his hand forward, forcing it through the resistance, through the pain that was trying to scramble his nerves. His fingers closed around the generator casing. It was hot enough to blister skin. "Open," Peter growled. He squeezed. His grip strength honed by years of handling heavy ordnance, and recoil was immense. The metal casing groaned. The violet light flickered. With a roar that tore at his throat, Peter wrenched the generator downward. Crunch. The casing shattered. Sparks showered down on his face, blinding and hot. The violet light died instantly. The humming in the room dropped an octave. The magnetic lock on the door disengaged with a heavy clunk. Peter leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His right hand was red and blistering, shaking uncontrollably. He looked at it, then clenched it into a fist until the shaking stopped. "Job is not done," he told himself. He kicked the door open. The corridor outside was chaos. 2 guards were writhing on the floor, clutching their helmets. The pulse was hitting them hard, even through their armor. They looked up as Peter emerged from the smoke of the isolation cell. To them, he must have looked like a demon. He was covered in soot, his shirt torn, his hand burned, and he was walking upright in a sonic storm that was bringing their people to their knees. One of the guards fumbled for his weapon. "Stay back," he gasped. Peter stepped forward. He didn't run. He didn't dodge. He moved with the terrifying inevitability of a landslide. He reached down, grabbed the guard's weapon by the barrel, and twisted it out of his hands. "Go to sleep," Peter said softly. He didn't shoot them. He used the butt of the rifle, delivering 2 precise, controlled strikes to their helmets. They slumped into unconsciousness. It was a kindness. Being unconscious was the only way to escape the sound. Peter checked the charge on the rifle. It was full. "I really wanted a quiet night," Peter murmured. He stepped over the bodies and began his ascent. The path to the royal chambers was a gauntlet. Malrech had deployed his personal elite guard soldiers who had been outfitted with experimental dampeners that shielded them from the pulse. They were moving through the palace, securing key tactical points, arresting loyalists, and ensuring the transition of power was absolute. They were professional. They were efficient. They were not ready for Peter. Peter moved through the servant corridors, bypassing the main thoroughfares. He knew that Malrech would expect him to charge the Wolfsong engine immediately. That was the tactical play. Destroy the weapon, save the city. But Peter wasn't playing tactically. He was playing emotionally. Daisy was the priority. He emerged onto the third-floor landing, a wide balcony that overlooked the central atrium. Below, he could see the coup in progress. Courtiers were being herded into groups by black armored troopers. The Wolfsong pulse was so loud here that the crystal chandeliers were swaying violently. A squad of 5 shock troopers spotted him. "Target sighted!" the leader shouted. "The Earthman, take him down!" Plasma fire erupted, scorching the air. Peter didn't seek cover. He vaulted over the railing. In the low gravity, the jump was a slow, controlled descent. He fired mid-air, 3 shots, 3 hits. The plasma bolts took the troopers in the shoulder gaps of their armor, spinning them around. Peter landed with a heavy impact that cracked the floor tile. He didn't pause to absorb the shock. He rolled forward, coming up inside the guard of the remaining 2 troopers. It was brutal close-quarters work. Peter used his density as a weapon. He slammed his shoulder into the chest of a trooper, sending the lighter Wolfkin flying back into a wall with the force of a car crash. The last trooper tried to bring his baton down, but Peter caught his wrist. "Wrong move," Peter said. He disarmed the man and threw him into a decorative fountain. Peter checked his surroundings. The atrium was clear. He checked his internal clock. He had been out of the cell for 12 minutes. Daisy had been alone for 12 minutes. Too long. He sprinted toward the grand staircase, taking the steps, 3 at a time. Daisy heard the fighting before she saw it. It sounded like thunder rolling through the hallway, heavy thuds, the hiss of plasma, the sound of bodies hitting walls. Then silence. She gripped the candelabra tighter, her knuckles white. She stood facing the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The lock mechanism sparked. Someone was forcing it from the outside. The door slid open, halfway, then jammed. A pair of hands, large scarred hands, gripped the metal and forced it the rest of the way. Peter stepped in. He looked terrible. His face was smeared with soot and blood. His shirt was in tatters. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving like a bellows. Daisy dropped the candelabra. It hit the floor with a dull clang. "Peter," she breathed. He scanned the room instantly, checking corners, checking windows. Only when he was sure she was the only threat in the room did he look at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "Am I hurt?" Daisy stared at him. "Look at you, you are bleeding everywhere." "Not my blood," Peter lied. He walked over to her. He didn't hug her. He didn't collapse. He stood in front of her like a wall that had decided to relocate. "We have to move. Malrech is in the engine room. He is amplifying the signal." Daisy reached out and touched his arm. She felt the heat radiating off him. He was burning up. The resonance field was cooking him slowly, fever hot. "You came for me," she whispered. "You should have gone to the engine. You should have stopped Malrech." "I had to secure the asset," Peter said stiffly. "Don't lie to me," Daisy said. She looked up at his eyes. They were dark and hard, but there was something behind them that hadn't been there before, a terrifying sort of devotion. "You could have ended this 10 minutes ago, but you came here instead." "The engine can wait," Peter said. "You can't." For the first time, Daisy realized the terrifying reality of what stood before her. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who had walked through fire because he was afraid she might get singed, and he was shaking. "You are in pain," Daisy realized. "The field hurts you, doesn't it? Even if you don't resonate the energy it burns." "It is manageable," Peter said. "You are a liar," Daisy said softly. She took his hand, the one with the blistered skin. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "Let's go. We have a chancellor to dethrone." The path to the Wolfsong engine took them through the heart of the Citadel. They moved as a unit. Peter took point, clearing the way with ruthless efficiency. Daisy stayed close, using her knowledge of the palace to bypass security checkpoints. They found Juno Hart and Dr. Saren barricaded in the secondary control room, just above the main engine chamber. Keeper Thane was frantically typing commands into a console. "You are alive!" Juno shouted when they burst in. She looked at Peter. "You look like you wrestled a garbage disposal unit." "I won," Peter said. "Status Baubar." "Bad," Dr. Saren said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Malrech has locked us out of the primary buffer. He is pushing the engine to 120% capacity. The core is destabilizing. If he keeps this up, the resonance will not just kill the Wolfkin. It will shatter the Citadel's structural supports. We will fall out of the sky." "He is insane," Daisy said. "He would destroy the kingdom to rule it." "He believes he is purifying it," Keeper Thane said grimly. "He thinks the weak will break and the strong will survive to rebuild." Peter checked his weapon. It was empty. He tossed it aside and picked up a heavy engineering wrench from the workbench. "Open the blast doors," Peter said. "Peter," Juno warned. "The radiation inside the chamber right now is lethal. Not prompt critical, but high. And the sonic pressure will be like standing inside a jet engine." "Open the doors," Peter repeated. Juno looked at Daisy. Daisy nodded. "Open them," the air commanded. Juno hit the release. The heavy blast doors groaned and slid apart. The sound hit them like a physical blow, a screaming white-hot wall of noise. Daisy fell to her knees, clutching her head. Peter stumbled, but he caught himself. He reached down, hauled Daisy up, and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her tight against his side to shield her. They walked into the light. The engine room was blinding. The massive crystal heart was pulsing so fast, it looked like a strobe light. Standing on the central gantry, silhouetted against the glare, was Chancellor Malrech. He wore a suit of ceremonial armor, gleaming black. He looked like a dark priest presiding over the end of the world. "I wondered when you would arrive," Malrech's voice boomed over the speakers, cutting through the noise. The hammer and the glass. Peter marched Daisy onto the platform. They stood 10 meters from Malrech. The air between them shimmered with heat and sound. "Turn it off, Malrech!" Daisy shouted. Her voice was thin, but it held steady. "You are killing your own people." "I am forging them," Malrech roared. He spread his arms. "Look at them, Daisy. Look at our history. We are fragile. We break. We rely on shields, on diplomacy, on hiding. I am giving us a spine. I am burning away the weakness, so that what remains is unbreakable." He pointed a gloved finger at Peter. "And you," Malrech sneered. "The Terran, the heavy thing. You think you are a hero, you are just a tool. A blunt instrument. I refuse to hand you the hammer to shatter my world." Peter let go of Daisy. The memory of Cinder Vale washed over him. The mud, the rain. The bodies of his friends shaking apart while Malrech's prototype weapon hummed its deadly song. Malrech had sold them. He had watched them die for profit, for research. The rage was a cold black thing in Peter's chest. "I am not a hammer," Peter said. His voice was low, but it carried. "I am the consequences," Peter charged. He moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. He raised the heavy wrench, intending to bring it down on Malrech's skull. He wanted to end it. He wanted to splatter Malrech across the control console and watch the light go out in his eyes. "Peter, stop." Daisy's voice cut through the red haze. She didn't shout it as a command. She screamed it as a plea. She threw herself in front of him, grabbing his arm. Peter froze. The wrench was raised, high, trembling in the air. He looked down at her. "Move, Daisy," Peter growled. "He has to die." "Not like this," Daisy wept. She was shaking from the pain of the pulse, but her grip on his arm was iron tight. "Look at him, Peter. He wants you to do it. He wants you to prove him right. He wants to show the world that humans are just killers, that we need his war to survive you." Peter looked at Malrech. The Chancellor was smiling. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was waiting. If Peter killed him now, in a rage, the footage would play on every screen in the system. The Terran brute murdering the Wolfkin Chancellor. It would be the spark for an eternal war. Daisy would never hold the throne. The Alliance would burn. "Don't become his proof," Daisy whispered. "Don't let him win." Peter lowered the wrench. His chest heaved. He looked at Malrech, then back at Daisy. The rage didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became cold, calculating focus. "Plan B," Peter said. "What is Plan B?" Daisy asked. "We break the toy," Peter said. He turned toward the engine. The black amplifier nodes were still attached to the base of the crystal, throbbing with power. Malrech realized what was happening. His smile vanished. "No!" Malrech shouted. He drew a sonic pistol and fired. The bolt hit Peter in the shoulder, burning through his shirt and searing the flesh. Peter didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. He just kept moving toward the console. "He shielded the interface," Peter shouted over the roar. "I can't get close enough to smash it. The field is too strong." "I can open it," Daisy yelled. "But I need to get inside the frequency." "It will kill you." "Not if you anchor me," Daisy grabbed Peter's hand. "Like in the tunnel, be my gravity, Peter." She didn't wait for him to agree. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, diving straight into the screaming chaos of the Wolfsong pulse. It hit her like a tidal wave. The noise was blinding. It tried to tear her consciousness apart. But she felt Peter's hand. It was a solid, immovable point in the storm. She held on to it. She channeled the agony through him. Peter roared as the feedback hit him. It felt like his arm was being dipped in acid. His knees buckled, but he refused to fall. He stood there, a human lightning rod grounding the energy that would have vaporized her. Daisy found the frequency of the shield. It was a complex shifting pattern. She didn't try to break it. She joined it. She sang with it. And then she pushed it, just a fraction of a note off key. Phase shift. The shield flickered. "Now!" Daisy screamed. Peter didn't hesitate. He swung the wrench with everything he had left. Smash. The wrench connected with the primary amplifier node. Metal crunched. Sparks exploded in a shower of white fire. The node shattered, spewing black smoke. The Wolfsong engine screamed a sound of mechanical agony, and then the light dropped. The blinding white glare faded to a dull, pulsing blue. The silence that followed was deafening. Malrech stood frozen on the gantry. His weapon lay on the floor. The power was gone. The song was broken. "You," Malrech whispered. "You broke the song." "We changed the tune," Peter rasped, dropping the bent wrench. Malrech looked at them, the human bleeding from a plasma wound, the air shaking, but standing tall. He looked at the smoking ruin of his amplifier. And then his face twisted into a mask of pure fanaticism. "If I cannot conduct the orchestra," Malrech hissed, "then I will silence the hall." He lunged for the manual override lever, the emergency flush that would vent the engine's core plasma into the palace, incinerating everything within a 5-mile radius. "Stop him!" Daisy shouted. Peter was too far away. He was exhausted, burnt, and wounded. But he moved. He threw himself forward, not to fight, but to intercept. He wouldn't make it. Malrech's hand was inches from the lever. Suddenly the console sparked. A stream of coolant gas erupted from a vent directly into Malrech's face. Up in the control booth, Juno Hart slammed her fist onto the emergency vent button. "Eat chemistry, you fascist!" Malrech staggered back, blinded and choking. It was enough. Peter slammed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Malrech fought with the desperation of a true believer, clawing at Peter's eyes, screaming about purity. But Peter was done with games. He pinned Malrech to the great floor, his hand around the Chancellor's throat. "Yield," Peter growled. Malrech stared up at him, eyes bloodshot and watering. He wheezed air struggling to pass through his crushed windpipe. "Do it," Malrech choked out. "Make me a martyr." "No," Peter said. He released the pressure just enough to let Malrech breathe, but not enough to move. "Martyrs are remembered. You are just going to be an inmate." Security teams, loyalist guards, led by a battered but conscious captain, burst into the chamber. They swarmed the platform, pulling Malrech away from Peter. Daisy stood over the fallen chancellor. She smoothed her torn dress. She adjusted her splint. She looked every inch the queen she was about to become. "Take him away," Daisy ordered coldly, "and ensure he has sound dampening cuffs. I do not want to hear him speak again." Malrech was dragged away. As he passed them, he stopped struggling. He looked at Daisy, then at Peter, with a strange, hollow expression. It wasn't defeat. It was pity. "You think you won," Malrech whispered. His voice was raspy, broken. "You think you are fighting me." He looked back at the Wolfsong engine, which was now pulsing with a slow, uneven rhythm. "You are fighting what sings," Malrech said. Then he was gone, dragged into the darkness of the corridor. Peter sank to his knees. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a tidal wave of pain. His shoulder was throbbing. His hand was a ruin of blisters. Every muscle in his body felt torn. Daisy was beside him instantly. She knelt on the hard grate, ignoring the ruin of her gown. "Peter," she said softly. She reached out to touch his face, then hesitated, afraid to hurt him. "I am fine," Peter lied automatically. "You are a terrible liar," Daisy said, tears spilling over her lashes. "You are burnt. You are shot. You are bleeding." "I am alive," Peter said. He looked at her. "And so are you. That counts as a win." Daisy looked at the burn on his shoulder. "I was afraid," she admitted. "When I saw you fall, I realized something." "That I am heavy," Peter cracked a weak smile. "That you can break," Daisy said seriously. "I always thought you were stone. But stones don't bleed. You are flesh and blood, Peter. And you almost died for a throne that isn't yours." "I didn't do it for the throne," Peter said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. From the control booth, Juno's voice crackled over the intercom. "Hate to interrupt the moment, lovebirds, but we have a situation. The engine is not stabilizing." Peter and Daisy looked up at the crystal heart. It was pulsing blue, safe enough, but the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't the steady thump hiss of a machine. It was irregular, syncopated. Thump, 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 pause, thump. It sounded like breathing. "It is holding," Dr. Saren's voice joined in, sounding terrified. "But the data makes no sense. The amplifier is destroyed, but the signal pattern is still evolving. It is like the engine is learning. It is improvising jazz." Peter stared at the machine. Malrech's words echoed in his mind. "You are fighting what sings." A cold shiver went down his spine that had nothing to do with the injuries. "We secured the room," Peter said, forcing himself to stand up. He offered a hand to Daisy. "Let the scientists worry about the ghost in the machine. We have a government to rebuild." Daisy took his hand. Her grip was firm. She wasn't the girl who had slapped him in the hallway anymore. She was the woman who had just stared down a coup and won. "Yes," Daisy said, looking at the breathing crystal. "But keep your weapon close, Peter. I don't think the concert is over yet." They walked out of the engine room together, leaving the machine to hum its strange new song in the dark. The tribunal hall was no longer a place of pristine singing glass. It was a ruin of its former self, a cathedral of silence, where the dust of the coup still drifted in the gravity shafts. The great resonance chandeliers, once vibrant with the wolf-song pulse, hung dark and lifeless like the rib cages of dead leviathans. Daisy stood at the center of the dais. She wore the ceremonial robes of the High Regent, but she had stripped them of their heavy jeweled ornamentation. Her arm was still in a sling, a stark white bandage against the black silk of her mourning dress. She did not look like a deity descending from the moons. She looked like a survivor who had climbed out of a grave. Across the room, the gathered court stood in uneasy clusters. The purebloods who had supported Malrech were gone, arrested, or fled, but the remaining nobles looked at Daisy with a mixture of fear and skepticism. And when they were not looking at her, they were looking at him. Peter stood 3 steps behind Daisy's throne. He was the only human in the room. He wore a fresh dress uniform that Juno Hart had fabricated for him, but it could not hide the stiffness in his movements or the bandages that peeked out from his collar. He stood at ease, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of stone. To the Wolfkin, he was a monster. He was the dense, heavy creature that had walked through their sonic fire and broken their chancellor with his bare hands. Daisy stepped forward to the podium. Her voice did not need amplification. The silence of the room carried it to the farthest corners. For 300 years, Daisy began, we have told ourselves a story. We told ourselves that because our bones are light, our spirits must be pure. We told ourselves that the wolf song pulse was a gift that elevated us above the heavy worlders, above the dirt and the gravity. She paused, looking directly at the section of the hall where the ambassadors from the neighboring system sat. We lied, she said. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. A wolf heir did not admit fault. A wolf heir was infallible. We were fragile. Daisy continued, her voice gaining strength. But being fragile does not mean we were right. It just meant we were terrified. And in our terror we allowed men like Malrech to turn our beautiful song into a cage. We allowed him to use our biology as an excuse for tyranny. She gestured to the large, holographic screen suspended above the court. It flickered to life, showing the data recovered from the engine room, the schematics of the frequency amplifier, the logs of the targeted assassinations, and the dampening codes used to silence dissent. Malrech did not want to protect the Citadel, Daisy declared. He wanted to weaponize it. He wanted to turn the pulse into a leash. The evidence was damning. The murmurs in the room shifted from skepticism to anger. But Daisy knew that proving Malrech's guilt was the easy part. The hard part was standing right behind her. And I know what you fear now, Daisy said, turning slightly to gesture toward Peter. You look at him and you see a weapon. You see a creature that does not resonate, a man who can shatter our glass walls with a touch. Peter did not flinch under the scrutiny of 500 alien eyes. He met their gaze, his dark eyes unreadable. You are right, Daisy said softly. He is a weapon. He was forged in wars we cannot imagine, on a world where gravity tries to crush you from the moment you are born. She walked back toward the throne, stopping directly in front of Peter. The court held its breath. But a weapon is defined by where it is pointed, Daisy said. And this man chose to point himself at the darkness so that we could live in the light. She reached out and took Peter's hand, his uninjured one. It was a breach of protocol so severe that several older courtiers audibly gasped. The wolf heir did not touch aliens. The wolf heir did not bond with the heavy. I choose him, Daisy announced, her voice ringing like a bell. Not as a bodyguard, not as a servant. I choose Peter of Terra as my consort and high protector of the Citadel. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 1,000 years of tradition shattering. Peter looked down at her. His expression cracked, just for a moment, revealing the surprise beneath the discipline. He squeezed her hand, a gentle pressure that grounded her. So, Peter whispered, his voice low enough that only she and the front row could hear. Does consort come with hazard pay? Because I feel like the insurance premiums just went up. Daisy let out a laugh, a genuine bubbling sound that broke the tension in the room like a hammer hitting a pane of glass. Then immediately tears welled in her eyes. She squeezed his hand back hard. "We will negotiate the contract later," she whispered. From the shadows of the side entrance, High Regent Calder watched them. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his skin gray and translucent, looking as if the light was fading from inside him. But as he watched his daughter hold the hand of the human soldier, a smile touched his lips. It was the same smile he had worn at the gala. Enigmatic, knowing, and terrifyingly sad. The celebration was brief. There was work to be done. An hour later, the core group, Daisy, Peter, Doctor, Saren, Keeper, Thane, and Juno, descended into the depths of the Citadel. They were heading back to the Wolfsong engine. The atmosphere in the service elevator was heavy. The euphoria of the tribunal had faded, replaced by the grim reality of the readings on Dr. Saren's datapad. "The engine is not stabilizing," Saren said, his voice tight. "Malrech's amplifier is gone, but the core rhythm is evolving. It is becoming erratic, spasmodic. Like a heart in fibrillation," Juno added. "Or a beast trying to shake off a flea," Keeper Thane muttered. The old historian looked terrified, his fur standing on end. When the elevator doors opened, the sound hit them. It wasn't the screaming, weaponized pulse from the coup. It was a low, throbbing groan that vibrated in the floor plates. The lights in the chamber were dim, pulsing in time with the sound thump, drag, thump, drag. "It sounds sick," Daisy whispered. They walked out onto the gantry. The Wolfsong engine hung in the center of the shaft, a massive diamond heart, the size of a building. But it was no longer pristine white. Veins of dark, smoky quartz were spreading through the crystal lattice. "We have to shut it down," Peter said. "If that thing cracks while it is active, the energy release will vaporize the city." "It is not that simple, Peter," Keeper Thane said. "The engine is not just a machine. It never was." Thane walked to the railing and looked down into the abyss below the crystal. "The First Dynasty found the engine," Thane confessed. "We didn't build it. We found it buried in the moon. It was a dormant psionic matrix. We woke it up. We fed it our biorhythms, and in exchange it sang the song that let us build our glass cities." "It is symbiotic," Dr. Saren said, fascinated and horrified. "No," a voice spoke from the entrance. "It is parasitic." They all turned. High Regent Calder stood there. He had followed them down. He looked frail, barely able to stand, but his eyes were burning with a desperate intensity. "Father," Daisy stepped toward him. "You should be in the medical wing." "I have no time for medicine," Calder said. He limped forward, his cane clicking against the metal grate. "The engine is hungry, Daisy. It has always been hungry." Calder looked up at the groaning crystal. "Why do you think the pulse glitches every few generations?" Calder asked. "Why do you think we have purges, civil wars? It is not politics. It is the engine. When the population grows too large, when the noise becomes too loud, the engine induces madness. It triggers aggression. It forces us to kill each other to reduce the load on its matrix." Daisy stared at him in horror. "You mean Malrech didn't start the coup?" "Malrech was a symptom," Calder said. "He thought he was a visionary. He was just an antibody. The engine pushed him to purge the weakness, because the engine wanted to feed on the conflict." Peter stepped forward. The realization hit him, like a physical blow. "Cinder Vale," Peter said. His voice was a growl. Calder looked at Peter. The old wolf's smile returned, that sad, knowing smile. "Yes," Calder said. "The engine reaches out. It scans for threats. It scans for tools. 10 years ago it sensed a species that was expanding aggressively, humans. It tested you." "It killed my men," Peter said. "It tried to kill you all," Calder corrected. "It sent a frequency designed to boil primate brains. It worked on your squad, but not on you." Peter froze. "My implant." "Your implant was fine," Calder said softly. "You survived because you are a void, Peter. You are a genetic anomaly, a biological dead zone that the song cannot touch. The engine tasted you, and it felt nothing, and that terrified it. So it lured me here, Peter realized. The signal, the rhythm Malrech used was bait. It wanted you close, Calder explained. It wanted to study the thing it could not kill. Or perhaps it wanted to drive you mad enough to destroy yourself. Peter looked at his hands. For 10 years he had been driven by a burning need for revenge. He had thought he was chasing a ghost. Now he realized he had been dragged across the stars on a leash held by a crystal god. And you knew? Daisy whispered to her father. You knew all of it. I knew the engine was waking up for another purge, Calder said. I knew Malrech was hearing its whispers. And I knew that if I tried to stop it, the engine would kill me and find another puppet. Calder looked at Peter. That is why I smiled, Peter. That night at the gala, when I told Daisy she picked the wrong guy to flirt with. Calder's eyes filled with tears. I didn't bring you here to be a bodyguard. I didn't bring you here to be an advisor. I brought you here because you are the only thing in the universe that can walk into that room and kill God. The silence in the chamber was heavy. You used him, Daisy said, her voice shaking with fury. You used us both. I am a king, Calder said simply. I used the pieces I had to save the board. If the engine is not stopped permanently, it will consume you, Daisy. It will consume the humans. It will sing until there is nothing left but glass and bone dust. Peter looked up at the crystal. The dark veins were pulsing faster now. The rhythm was speeding up. Thump, 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 thump. It knew they were talking about it. How do we kill it? Peter asked. The core, Juno said, checking her scanner. There is a manual dampening rod inside the casing. If you pull it, the reaction stops. The crystal goes inert. But the field inside the casing, Dr. Saren warned, is pure psionic pressure. It will be like walking into a nuclear reactor of emotion. A wolfkin would die before they took a step. A normal human would go insane. But I am boring, Peter said. A dry, humorless smile touched his lips. He looked at Daisy. If I pull that rod, Peter said, the pulse stops. The anti-gravity assists fail. The resonance heating fails. The Citadel will be heavy, Daisy said. It will be cold. We will have to rebuild everything from the ground up. But you will be free, Peter said. Daisy looked at the engine, the monster that had manipulated her people for centuries. Then she looked at Peter. Do it, she said. Peter nodded. He turned to the walkway that led directly into the heart of the crystal. Peter, Daisy called out. He stopped. Hazard pay, she whispered. Double. Peter chuckled. Deal. He started to walk. As he crossed the threshold of the containment field, the pain hit him. It wasn't physical pain, not at first. It was a wave of pure, concentrated hate. The engine screamed in his mind. It showed him Cinder Vale. It showed him his friends dying. It showed him every mistake, every failure, every nightmare he had ever had amplified to a deafening volume. Turn back. The voice wasn't a sound. It was a command written in his neurons. You are nothing. You are dirt. Peter gritted his teeth. He kept walking, one step. The air grew hot. The pressure increased. His skin began to blister again. His bones, those dense, heavy bones, felt like they were being crushed in a vice. Die, the engine screamed. Submit. I don't submit, Peter grunted, forcing his leg forward. He was 20 meters away. The engine changed tactics. It showed him Daisy. It showed him Daisy, dead, broken her glass, bones shattered because he failed. Peter stopped. The image was so real it stole the breath from his lungs. Peter, Daisy's voice, but not in his head. Real, behind him. She had stepped onto the walkway. Daisy, get back, Peter roared, not turning around. It will kill you. I am not leaving you alone in the dark, Daisy shouted. She raised her hands. She didn't try to fight the engine. She did what she had tried to do in the tunnel. She reached out with her mind. She didn't try to block the noise. She tried to harmonize with Peter. "I am here," she projected. "I am the anchor." Peter felt it, a cool silver thread in the middle of the firestorm. It was Daisy's will. She was terrified, she was in agony, but she was holding on to him. It gave him the one thing the engine couldn't simulate: the truth. Peter roared. He drew on the reserve of strength that only a human possesses, the stubborn, illogical refusal to lie down when physics says you should. He sprinted the last 10 meters. The heat was blinding. His uniform caught fire. He didn't care. He reached the central casing. The dampening rod was there, glowing red hot. The engine screamed one last desperate note. It sounded like a pleading child. "Shut up," Peter growled. He grabbed the rod with both hands, and he pulled. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a jar. The light in the crystal died instantly. The humming stopped. The pressure vanished. Peter fell to his knees, gasping for air. The silence was sudden and violent. Then the floor shook. Without the pulse to sustain the structural integrity, Fields the Citadel settled. It was a drop of only a few inches, but it felt like the world was ending. "It is done," Juno's voice came over the comms, static-filled but triumphant. "The core is inert. It is just a rock, Peter. Just a big, expensive rock." Peter slumped forward, resting his forehead on the cool metal of the console. He was alive. But behind them on the gantry, High Regent Calder fell. He didn't collapse like a man fainting. He fell like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Father!" Daisy screamed. She ran to him, ignoring the residual heat radiating from the engine. She fell to her knees beside him, pulling his head into her lap. Calder's eyes were open, but they were dim. His breathing was shallow, a rattling rasp in his chest. "The link," Dr. Saren whispered, kneeling beside them. He was the regent. He was the primary interface for the engine. When the connection severed, "It took the spark," Calder whispered. Daisy wept, her tears falling onto his gray face. You knew this would happen." "A king pays the price," Calder wheezed. He looked past Daisy toward Peter, who was limping back toward them. Calder looked at the human. He tried to raise his hand, but he was too weak. "Protect the glass," Calder whispered to Peter. "I swear it," Peter said, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "On my life," Calder smiled. It wasn't the scary smile anymore. It was just a father's smile. "Heavy," Calder breathed. "Good." And then he stopped. The High Regent was dead. The engine was dead. The silence in the room was profound, but it wasn't the empty, terrifying silence of the void. It was the silence of a blank page. 3 months later. The Skyglass Cafe had been renamed The Anchor. It was still under renovation scaffolding covering the walls where the resonance panels used to be. The new walls were reinforced with steel and polymer Terran materials. Ugly to some, but undeniably strong. Daisy sat at a table by the window. She wore a simple gray suit, practical and warm. The heating systems were still being rebuilt, so everyone in the Citadel wore layers now. She watched the city outside. It looked different. The spires didn't shimmer as much. There were construction crews everywhere, humans, and Wolfkin working side by side. It was a noisier city. There were drills, hammers, shouts. It wasn't a song. It was a cacophony, and Daisy loved it. Peter placed 2 mugs of steaming coffee on the table. He sat down opposite her. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wore a heavy civilian jacket and a pair of work gloves. "The structural report for the lower districts is in," Peter said, taking a sip of the black coffee. "Juno says the new supports are holding. We won't fall out of the sky today." "That is good news," Daisy said. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "And the council?" "They are complaining about the noise," Peter said. but they are eating the food supplies we brought in. They will live." Daisy looked at him. His burns had healed into silvery scars on his neck and hands. He looked tired, but the darkness that had haunted his eyes for 10 years, the cinder veil shadow, was gone. "Do you miss it?" Daisy asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The silence, the anger, the mission." Peter looked out the window. "I realized something, Daisy. The anger was just another kind of noise. It drowned out everything else." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was gentle, careful. "I like the quiet," Peter said. "I like hearing you breathe." Daisy smiled. "You are getting soft, high protector." "Don't tell anyone," Peter said. "I have a reputation to maintain. Your secret is safe with me." Daisy looked at the reflection in the window. She saw herself no longer the fragile heir, but the queen of a broken, beautiful, rebuilding world. She saw Peter, the heavy rock that anchored her. The wolf song was gone. The ancient melody that had dictated their lives was silent. But as Daisy listened to the clatter of construction and the hum of conversation in the cafe, she realized they were making a new music. It was messy. It was uncoordinated. It was improvised. But it was theirs. "So," Daisy said, taking a sip of coffee. "About that hazard pay," Peter groaned, leaning back in his chair. "I knew it. You are going to bankrupt me." "I was thinking," Daisy said, her eyes twinkling. "Since you saved the kingdom and the queen, perhaps we can call it, even if you just stay." Peter looked at her. He looked at the woman who had walked into the fire for him. "I wasn't planning on going anywhere," Peter said. "Gravity is pretty strong here." "Yes," Daisy whispered, squeezing his hand. "It is." They sat there together, watching the sunset over a city that was no longer made of glass, but of steel stone, and the unbreakable bond between two people who had refused to be weapons. The end.